We have been now for several weeks looking at kind of some historical background to our study of chapter 6 in the Confession. And we've been looking at the basic outline of an article by Paul Blowers dealing with some different trajectories, different ways that the early church thought about how we in our sin relate to Adam and his sin. And some in the early church focused on what we might call an exemplary understanding, that Adam sinned, and by virtue of his example and the power of it being the first fall, if you will, everyone since then has picked up that bad habit, that trait, that vice, and they have seen from the power of his example, it just seems to impact everyone since that time. There was not, in some of these writers, a lot of reflection as to how. How is it that everybody sins? I mean, it's not just that lots of people picked up the bad example. Everybody picked up the bad example. And so how do you account for that? And there wasn't a lot of reflection on that. It was just kind of, well, Adam sinned, we sin, and everybody sins. Secondly, we looked at another trajectory in the early period, and we entitled this, I think, an eschatological trajectory, in that this is mainly in the writings and teachings of Irenaeus, and how he sees that in the fall of Adam, God is simply working out his eschatological plan to bring about the manifestation of Christ, who is the Messiah, the promised one, and in him, as Paul says in Ephesians 1:10, he's going to sum up all things. He's going to bring all this, all his eternal plan, if you will, to fruition in the coming of Christ. So the fall was, yes, it was a fall. There was rebellion. There was sin. There is corruption that is brought to play in that. If we think in terms of like Athanasius in the 4th century, he talks about the corruption and the literal disintegration of humanity, were it not for the intervention of Christ to restore humanity, all right? And to restore the degradation brought about by the fall of Adam. And so this really helps us see that the fall, or what went before the fall, was not like plan A. What went after the fall was not plan B. It was just all one big plan summed up in the person of Christ. Now, there's a little bit of truth, if you will, or maybe a lot of truth in all of those. We do learn from Adam's bad example. We do pick up bad habits, right? He is the father, if you will, of the race, and we do look to him, and everyone after him displays his character. So there is some sense there of the bad example of Adam passing on to everyone else. And there's certainly as much to appreciate in Irenaeus and the idea of recapitulation. That's the doctrine that we looked at when we looked at some of his writings and against heresies, and how God is recapitulating or summing up everything in Christ. Or another phrase we used was he's putting everything under a new head. All right, where we were in Adam, now we're in Christ, okay? Augustine is going to take us a little further, a little deeper into this, showing the, like a very clear connection between Adam and all who follow after him. He's going to show us that Adam, as that covenant head, all fall in Adam, and it's this great tragedy, this event that takes place that all of us are connected to by way of nature and by way of guilt. And those are two very important terms, nature and guilt. I was looking yesterday at a little booklet that I ordered several weeks ago. I forgot that I'd even ordered it, and it came in. And this is by a professor who is at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, a Southern Baptist seminary. And he's writing about what he sees to be the Southern Baptist view of the fall, sin, punishment, things like that. He's not talking about chapter 6 in our confession, but he's dealing with all those things, fall, sin, and punishment that fall out from that. I think the guy's name is Harwood, Adam Harwood. Maybe that's the guy's name. He's a prophet in New Orleans. And he's writing about this, and one of the things that he talks about is the concept of a covenant of works. Was Adam really under a covenant of works? And because if Adam was not under a covenant of works, then the judgment that falls upon Adam in that covenant surely won't pass to everybody else, because it's almost like everybody gets their own covenant. Everybody gets their own restart or reset button, all right? And so Harwood talks about how we inherit from Adam a sinful nature, but we're not guilty. We're not condemned. The only reason we're going to be condemned or held guilty and accountable is basically just what we do. There's no nature, there's no guilt that's passed on, if you will, under your covenant head, all right? So the imputation of guilt, he says, that's not a Baptist way of thinking about things. Now, what's interesting to me is as I go back and I look at his little booklet, he goes back to the early 20th century. For Southern Baptist theologians. He goes back to E.Y. Mullins, who was the president of Southern Seminary, early 20th century. What he doesn't do, he doesn't go back to the mid-19th century when the Southern Baptists were founded, except to say that the guys at Southern Seminary that have this thing called the abstract of principles, well, they hold these views. But that's like an aberration, all right, kind of a thing. The real Southern Baptist view is more, we inherit a sinful nature, but not guilt, all right? Which is an interesting conclusion to draw, but it's a right conclusion if you only use particular sources. If you only use the sources from the 20th century, then you could probably get that kind of a conclusion, because Southern Baptists did begin to shift in the early 20th century away from things like guilt and the covenant of works to just a sinful nature. He cited one professor that was at Southwestern when I was there back in the 90s. This is another seminary, Jack McGorman. And McGorman made the comment that there's not one shred of evidence at all in the whole Bible for a covenant of works with Adam. And I was like, well, okay, not one shred of evidence. And I would say maybe we could have a discussion and say, well, there is evidence, and you're just going to draw a different conclusion. That's okay. But just to say there's nothing there is like kind of just silly to me. But all that to say, there is truth in the example trajectory, there's truth in the eschatological trajectory, and there's truth to be found in this evental trajectory that we're kind of looking at now. Now, to kind of get at that, to kind of get at Augustine's view, or Augustine's view, I was asked earlier what the pronunciation, say it how you want. He's dead, he doesn't care, all right? He is now Augustine the Baptist. Who knows? I don't know. I don't know how to say his name. Usually, I think in historical circles, we say Augustine for this 4th century father, and we might say Augustine for the 6th century bishop or missionary that goes to England to carry the gospel there. But I will say Augustine, I will say Augustine. I'll just tell you now, I'm going to say both things. And I might even make up a third word to say it, all right? So what I want to do, though, for today is I want to give a little backdrop, a little background to Augustine himself, all right? I want you to kind of get to know the man a little bit. Before we just kind of assess his theology, let's think about his own experiences and his life and what might have kind of led up to his conclusions, right? So several things I want us to do today. We're going to look at some chapters in his life, kind of just look through broad periods in his life. We're going to look at a few of his writings, some principal controversies, we'll mention them, and then what theological contribution does Augustine make to the church, all right? So looking at life chapters, just some major segments to his life, there is what I'm going to call a beginning chapter, a classical chapter, dealing with a lot of his education, a Manichaean chapter, all right? And this is when he kind of goes off into a lot of crazy false Manichaean teaching, his conversion, all right? And then his life in the church, his role as a pastor, his leading of the church in northern Africa principally, okay? So let's think about the beginnings of his life. This is a little map there of Italy. You see Rome. You can see northern Africa, Carthage. This is basically the area where Augustine operates, all right? He doesn't travel a lot, but he did travel. He travels from down in Tagaste up to Milan, to Rome, to Carthage. And, in an age when most people probably never would have gone outside the village they were born in, all right, he is doing some traveling, all right? So this is kind of a map to orient you to where he is. You can see the little island of Malta. What happened on Malta? Remember Malta? Yeah, that's where they shipwrecked and the snake bit Paul and stuff like that. So he's very close to that kind of an area there, all right? So let's think about some beginnings, all right? The dates of this period are 354 to 370. 354 to 370. So he is a boy and then a young man, a young teenage man. He's born in Tagaste, little area there in northern Africa. His father is Patricius, and his mother is Monica. Now, Patricius is not a Christian, all right? His father was not a believer, and that was a real missing part of his life. But whatever was missing from the father, the mother makes up. Monica is she's like hero mom, all right? And, making all mothers feel bad, all right? Monica is devoted to her son. She is a very committed prayer warrior for her son. Augustine, there I go again. Now I'm self-conscious about it, all right? Augustine is very wayward, very promiscuous, has a very debauched lifestyle as a young man up into his 20s. Up until the time of his conversion. I'm not sure the age he is when he's converted, maybe somewhere around 30. But Monica is very devoted to her son, deeply grieved when he goes off into sin. He lives with a woman for a while, has a child by her. This breaks her heart. In his book, The Confessions, which we'll mention again here in a little bit, he has several sections devoted to his mother, attributing, of all things in the realm of men, attributing his salvation to his mother's prayers. I would say the Confessions of Augustine are a great book for moms. It's just to hear of Monica and her life, and he talks about her always respectfully, just loves his mother. Even though he's a complete loser and goes off book all the time, he does love his mother. His education at this point is rudimentary. It is a Christian education, but he is not baptized when he is young. Interesting, he does become one of the greatest advocates in the early church, late 4th century, early 5th century, for infant baptism. And this will be connected to his views on original sin, all right? I think we would share much of his thought on original sin, but not make the conclusion that we should baptize our babies. But for a young man who was not baptized as a baby, it's interesting this becomes a real pursuit for him. All right. And I'll just kind of pause at the end of these chapters, and if you have a question or something like that, you can feel free to ask that. Any question about his childhood or kind of brief here, but okay, I have a whole life to cover, so let's kind of jump onto the classical chapter, all right? So he's 16 years old, and 370 to 375, he has a period of life where he turns to philosophy. He studies in a couple of other towns that were on our map, Madura and Carthage, and he takes a teaching post in Thagaste, which is where he was born again, and then another one in Carthage. And it's during this time that Augustine acquires a concubine, kind of a common law wife, and has a child, Adeodatus, who he names that. And the name means the gift of God. So this is very interesting because he's not a believer at this time. He's living a rather horrid lifestyle, yet he still has this Christian education in his background, and when he goes to name his child, he sees his child as a gift that God gave to him and this common law wife that he has. This moves him in 375 to 382 for 7 years to what I would call the Manichaean chapter. And he turns to Manichaeanism, and this is kind of like some might call it a Christianity for intellectuals. Manichaeanism is a philosophy that kind of connects back to a man by the name of Mani, M-A-N-I, and he borrows from Christianity, Judaism, Eastern mysticism, Gnosticism. It's like I've opened my bag and I've thrown like all kinds of philosophies into it that deal with good and evil. Manichaeanism is a radical good-evil distinction, all right? Just to show you a distinction here, perhaps you've heard in Eastern philosophy there's this thing called the yin and the yang. You've heard that before, all right? Maybe you've seen the little yin-yang symbol. All right, and it's almost like a comma, you know, two commas put together to make a circle, if you can kind of think of that. One comma's black and one's white. But what do you notice about the black one and the white one, Jeff? In the black one, in the middle of it, there's a white dot, and in the white one, in the middle of it, there's a what? A black dot, all right? Yeah, so in the yin and the yang, all right, though we, in evil, there's always a little bit of what? A little bit of good, and in good, there's always a little bit of evil, all right? We're trying to keep balance between the two. Please don't take this out of context. I am not advocating the yin and the yang, all right? That is heresy, it's false teaching, it's wrong, all right? And if you have a yin-yang symbol anywhere, I don't know, get rid of it. If somehow you can't get rid of it, get a white and a black marker, all right? And color in the black dot, or white, and the white dot black, because there is that which is good and only good, and that is God, and evil, and that is Satan himself. And yes?
It seems like everybody I knew in college was American. They just want to throw everything Eastern mysticism and Christianity and Judaism and any other philosophy that you can throw them all together and kind of say, well, they're all good.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, but Manichaeanism would, though, say there is a good and there is an evil. It's a radical distinction, separation between this concept of good and evil. And, I mean, there's truth in that, right? There's good and there's evil. God is good, right? There's evil. There's no good in the devil. And so this Manichaean chapter, this radical dualism, good versus evil, spirit versus matter, you could probably hear some Gnosticism in that, Greek dualism going on there. Redemption There are particles of light that are trapped in matter, and they must escape. Now, this is very Gnostic. Think of Gnosticism and the human person. All right, we are this body-soul dualism. We are like these souls of light trapped in these bodies of darkness, and we have to do what? We have to escape. All right, and so there's a lot of escapism in that. That same kind of Gnostic dualism and escapism, just kind of a footnote, can creep into modern day Christianity. If your whole view of Christianity is just, I've got to get through this world so I can get to the next world, all right, you may be missing that God is the creator of this world, and it does display his glory. And there's something good and profitable about being here. And our thought should not just be escapism. Yes, Jeff?
I was going to mention, you say that just made me think of when I was baby Christian. We were hearing, not amongst us, but in different contexts, several people saying, I'm just waiting to get back out here.
Yeah, I just want to get out. There's a lot of that in some dispensational thinking. The world's just getting worse and worse and worse, and I'm just waiting for the rapture. And I get that, all right? And we do grieve at the wickedness and unrighteousness in the world, and we should. And I love the old gospel hymn, this world is not my home, I'm just passing through. But it's fun to sing. But if I fixate on that too long, it can really breed a lot of discontent. I mean, I am where I am. You're here. We are here. All right? This morning on the way to church, my service engine soon light is blinking. My truck is rattling. I didn't know if I was going to make it here. Every couple minutes, it would smooth out, and then then it would rattle. And I'm like, I just got to get me to the church, Lord, please just get me to church. I'll fix the truck later. And we made it, but I don't know what's wrong with it. Something's wrong with it. I'm going to have to look at it after church today or get somebody to come tow it tomorrow. And, things break, you get discouraged, and you're like, oh, I'm just waiting. Yeah, Jeff's garage door today, and everybody's got a story, right? We're just waiting for heaven. Well, we're not just waiting for heaven. We're living in the present, and so we don't want to miss what God's doing today. So it presents reality as this black and this white. Manichaean apologist and teacher, that's what Augustine becomes. Now this is an interesting, I wish I'd brought the book. I did not bring it. But he is a teacher during this period. Now, remember the classical chapter, he gets a job in Tagaste and Carthage, right? Now he's teaching Manichaeanism. He's an actual professor, teacher in some kind of school for Manichaeanism, all right? And later, he's going to come to Christ. That's the good news, all right? But when he comes to Christ, some of the very young men that he taught Manichaeanism are his principal agitators and opponents. It's like he can't get away from it because he taught these guys Manichaeanism so well, they embraced it, hook, line, and sinker, and now he's abandoned it, and they're coming after him in northern Africa with their Manichaean views. And Brown, Augustine of Hippo, I forget the guy's first name, Brown. You can look it up. You can find a free copy on the internet. It's a PDF. It's a wonderful biography of Augustine. And in it is a chapter on Manichaeanism. It's a very interesting chapter. And he shares about his grief. I wish I had brought that. And maybe I'll try to bring it next time. But just hearing him talk about that. So, there's always such an admonition there for our younger people. Now, we don't have a lot of younger people here today. We have some readies on the back row over there, or back there toward the back. But how often have you, who are older, looked back on your childhood and grieved because of things that you got yourself involved in when you were young, And maybe the people that you were involved in with those things, maybe they're not coming at you like the Manichaeans are coming after Augustine. But our memories come after us. Our thoughts come after us. And I have to flee back to Christ, and I have to remember that I've been forgiven. And I'm not condemned for those things anymore. But isn't it overwhelming to our hearts when those memories start to flood back in? And so the admonition is to, when you're young, come to Christ when you're young. And hold to Christ faithfully, because regrets can be overwhelming. You know, you see these movies or whatever, and somebody says, do you have any regrets? You know, they're about to die or whatever. Do you have any regrets? No, I have no regrets. I'm like, what are you? You know, just blind? Or you just don't want to, you still don't want to admit that you have stuff you did that was wrong? Of course, we all have regrets. Now, God's providential, and he led us where he wanted to lead us for his glory and for our good. But that doesn't mean that I look back on my sin and my waywardness and go, well, it was just all for God's glory. It was all good. No, bad is bad. Sin is sin. And, you know, that God has used it for his glory and my good doesn't make that evil that I did good. It was still an evil thing. And so he's grieving even after his conversion for this. And so, well, let's talk about his conversion. But before I do that, any questions? I think I jumped past the classical chapter 2 without asking any questions or comments. Joe?
With Augustine becoming a teacher, was that unusual? Was that like
He was incredibly bright and recognized for his acumen. Yeah, I mean, everybody would not have been a teacher. And so, you know, he's, whether it's the classical chapter, and probably even as a boy, he probably showed some kind of promise. But the classical chapter, the Manichaean chapter, he's kind of like a Paul, excelling beyond many of his contemporaries. And there's no question that Augustine is one of the brightest minds that's ever graced the church. Was he wrong on many things? Sure, all right? I joked earlier that he's going to be a Baptist in heaven, but I'm just teasing. He was not a Baptist, all right? He was a Paedo-Baptist for sure in that regard, but so many things that he has written to benefit the church. His work on the Trinity is mind-blowing. I mean, it's just wonderful. His book on Christian doctrine, we'll talk about some of his writings here in a moment. His confessions alone are just so overwhelming. There are a couple things in the confessions that you're like, yeah, what are you thinking about here? But the majority of the confessions is just commendable reading. We read it a couple years ago with the guys on Tuesday morning, and it was a wonderful study that we had. And so, yeah, good question there. And good pronunciation of the name. Way to go, Augustine. So, all right. Well, his conversion, let's talk about his conversion just a little bit. He is drawn to, well, this is from 382 to 389. He's drawn to Neoplatonism. This would probably give me the date of his conversion. Is it around 30? 354, 64, 74, 84. About 35. Okay, he's about 35 when he's converted. So he's drawn to a philosophical understanding that's often referred to as Neoplatonism, kind of a new version of Platonic thought. It has a very positive message. All beings are good. Now remember, he's coming out of the Manichaean phase, all right? And now we're going to do what? We're going to swing to this other end. Everybody's good, all right? He goes to Milan. Now this is northern Italy. And he is appointed to be a teacher of rhetoric, which is a very respected teaching position. And while he's in Milan, he encounters a man that he had heard about, but had not heard before, by the name of Ambrose. Ambrose is the bishop of Milan. I'm trying to think of where it was. When you talk a lot, you forget where you were saying something. It may have been here. In the latter part of the 4th century, there was an emperor of Rome, Theodosius I. I think we've talked about him. This may have been on the Tuesday night discipleship class studies that we were having. And some people say that Constantine made the Roman Empire Christian, and that's not true. Constantine made the Christian religion legal, all right? But Theodosius made it the official religion of Rome, all right? Theodosius was the man who convened in 381 the Council of Constantinople, which gave us the Niceno-Constantinopolitan Creed, which is what we use in our services, which I think today is back in the bulletin. Yeah, that's because I thought today was the first Sunday in May. But that's okay. We're going to do it anyway. I've been wanting to get back to the Nicene Creed. I've enjoyed the Athanasian Creed, but I want to get back to the Nicene. So Theodosius I was a godly Christian man in many ways and loved the Lord, loved Nicene orthodoxy, and loved the church. But he was a man, and he was a politician. And there is an event that takes place where there was like a riot and some rebellion going on, and he decides he's going to quench it, and he locks a bunch of people in an arena, sends the soldiers in to kill them. All right, it was a horrible thing, and the city is in an uproar, and they appeal to Ambrose. Hears about it, and Ambrose is he is hot. He is so mad that Theodosius has done this horrible thing, an excessive political move. The people were wrong. They were rebelling or whatever. But it was like the old lex talionis, the eye for eye, tooth for tooth, trying to limit the idea of revenge. Theodosius, he thought, had just gone way over the top and had, you punch me in the face, well, I shoot you. That kind of a thing. This is it wasn't controlled. It didn't show reservation in a leader. It didn't show a good leadership. And so Ambrose basically excommunicates Theodosius, bars him from the Lord's table. And Theodosius is in Milan for something. I forget exactly what. And he comes to Ambrose's church to take the Lord's Supper. And Ambrose, the bishop, okay, he's a bishop. He's a pastor of one church in the whole empire. He's not even the Roman bishop, all right? And at this point in time, in the end of the 4th century, the Roman bishop would have had, some sense of elevation, but not papal primacy. We hadn't gotten to that point yet. That's more, getting to the 5th and 6th centuries. 5th century with Leo, and then going on with some others in the 6th century. Ambrose is just a bishop. He's a bishop in Milan, and Theodosius comes, and Ambrose refuses him. He says no. And Theodosius, I'm sure, is embarrassed and mad, and he goes away. Ambrose makes him come back, I think 3 times. And the final time, it's on his knees, begging for entrance to the table. And finally, Ambrose grants him the supper. And it's just wow, it's such an amazing story of the power of the gospel, and how Theodosius knows he needs this. He knows this is a means of grace for him. He doesn't want to be estranged from the church of Christ. And again, it's not like he can't get back into the Roman Catholic Church. It's not about the Roman Catholic Church. It's about Ambrose and Milan and just a preacher. Theodosius could have gone somewhere else and probably found admission. All right? But he's probably thinking that would have been kind of the coward's way. All right? He knows he has to display and demonstrate true repentance before the people, or he won't be believed. And so it's quite a standoff story when you read the whole story. All right. Well, he hears Ambrose, and he is amazed at Ambrose. Ambrose was supposedly an incredible rhetorician and preacher, and he wrote things and was and led various ministries there in Milan, and was highly regarded by the early church in this period. And Ambrose, we may mention him again next time. There are several people in the 4th century period, maybe even 3rd century, that are beginning to embrace this idea of an Adamic connection between us and our sin. All right, that there's some kind of inherent connection within like the nature of man. And this begins back with Tertullian, the early 3rd century teacher in northern Africa. It involves Ambrose. It eventually is going to involve Augustine. I almost said it. Augustine. All right. It's going to involve him too. So it really becomes kind of the Western view. Augustine, I can't even say it now. He leads the Western view. All right. The Eastern view tends to be more along the line of the exemplary model. All right. So he has an intellectual conversion under a man named Simplicianus, but a spiritual conversion under Scripture in a garden. All right. So he becomes intellectually convinced of the gospel under Simplicianus, but he still is not free from sin. He still can't seem to make this break from a life of sin and come to Christ and find the joy of the gospel. So he's in a garden one day, and I want to read to you from his confessions about this. And he comes to focus on this little phrase, tolle lege, take up and read, take up and read. Now, Jason, I'm not quite sure how to do this because it's on my computer. Can I escape out of this and just pull it up on the screen? We can even read it together. Will that show on the? It does show. Let's see if I can make it a little bigger for you. How's that? Okay, so we're going to read. We're going to read a little bit here, and it is rather lengthy, but this is out of his book, The Confessions. Let me just back up and give you what's been happening, all right? What's been happening is he's hanging out with a friend of his, Alypius, and Augustine and Alypius are just friends, and they're sharing their woes with one another. Both of them, I think, are not saved at this moment, but they're figuring things out, okay? And Augustine has been sharing with Alypius his frustrations with his sinfulness, it's for Augustine, it's sexual temptations, this incredible promiscuous kind of life. Even though he had this common law wife and this child from her, he had many other women, many other relationships. Finally, at the pleading of Monica, his mother, he puts away his common law wife and his child, but he still takes up other women. And he's just living this horribly prolific life. So he says, all this argument in my heart raged only between myself and myself. So he's keeping it where? He's keeping it close to the vest. He's sleeping it inside, all right? Alypius stood fast at my side, silently awaiting the outcome of my unprecedented agitation. But as this deep meditation dredged all my wretchedness up from the secret profundity of my being and heaped it all together before the eyes of my heart, a huge storm blew up within me and brought on a heavy rain of tears. In order to pour them out unchecked with the sobs that accompanied them, I arose. I left Alypius, for solitude seemed to me more suitable for the business of weeping. He's embarrassed in front of his friend. He's got to kind of get out of there, all right? I withdrew far enough to ensure that his presence, even his, would not be burdensome to me. This was my need, and he understood. For I think I had risen to my feet and blurted out something, my voice already choked with tears. He accordingly remained in stunned amazement at the place where we had been sitting. I flung myself down somehow under a fig tree and gave free rein to the tears that burst from my eyes like rivers as an acceptable sacrifice to you. Many things I had to say to you, and the gist of them, though not the precise words, was, O Lord, how long? How long will you be angry forever? Do not remember our age-old sins, for by these I was conscious of being held prisoner. I uttered cries of misery. Why must I go on saying, tomorrow, tomorrow? Why not now? Why not put an end to my depravity this very hour? I mean, some of you have probably prayed a prayer kind of like that, all right? So this is where he is, and you can even hear in that, perhaps, the biblically laden language. How long, O Lord? It's like the martyrs under the altar. It's like the psalmist. How long? Will you be angry forever? He sees his sin. His sin is not just a peccadillo. It's not just a little thing. All right? It's huge. But he also knows that there's only one who can deliver him, and he's pleading with God, why not now? Why not? I don't want it tomorrow. I want it today. I want release today. So, who will put an end to my depravity this very hour? I went on talking like this and weeping in intense bitterness of my broken heart. Suddenly I heard a voice from a house nearby. Perhaps the voice of a boy or a girl. I don't know. Singing over and over again. Pick up and read. Pick it up and read. My expression immediately altered, and I began to think hard whether children ordinarily repeated a ditty like this in any sort of game. But I could not recall ever having heard it anywhere else. I stemmed the flood of tears, and I rose to my feet, believing that this could be nothing other than a divine command to open the book and read the first passage that I chanced upon. Not really the recommended way of Bible reading. But in the providence of God, it worked. All right? So, he says, I had heard the story of how Antony had been instructed by a gospel text. Now, Antony is the friend of Athanasius earlier in the 4th century. He was we would probably call him like a hermetic monk. He went out into the wilderness, lived in a cave. People would come to him, bring him food and things like that. Occasionally, he would come back into town, and he is there battling the devil. And you can read Athanasius' work. It's called The Life of Antony. Right? It's a fascinating read. Read it a couple of times because you won't like it the first time because it's kind of weird. All right? This is a guy that probably was malnourished, living in a cave, fighting demons. All right? But at the same time, it was a very formative book in church history in the early 4th century. Athanasius had a lot of regard for Antony because he'd given himself to serve Christ. Again, not recommended that you go out to a cave and, not eat enough or whatever. But it's a very interesting book dealing with the spiritual warfare that Antony goes through. And I sometimes wonder if Athanasius, when he wrote the life of Antony, was actually writing the life of Antony as if it was almost like an allegory for his own life. I think there was a guy named Antony, but I think Athanasius took a lot, understood his own battles in light of Antony's struggles. Anyway, Augustine has heard about Antony, and Antony himself had opened up the Bible and found a verse, and he alludes to it here. He says, the text is, go and sell all you possess and give the money to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven, then come follow me. What's this from? The rich young ruler, right. And Antony took that quite literally and sold everything he had and went out and followed Jesus to the wilderness. So he was promptly converted to you by this plainly divine message. Stung into action, I returned to the place where Alypius was sitting. For on leaving it, I had put down the book of the apostles' letters. Now, Alypius isn't there anymore. He says, I snatched it up and I opened it and read in silence the passage on which my eyes first lighted. Not in dissipation or drunkenness, nor in debauchery and lewdness, nor in arguing and jealousy, but put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh or the gratification of your desires. This is out of Romans 13, verses 13 and 14. I had no wish to read further, nor was there need. No sooner had I reached the end of the verse than the light of certainty flooded my heart, and all dark shades of doubt fled away. Remember, he's already reached an intellectual conversion under Simplicianus. And some think that maybe that's when he truly got saved. But he's not brought any peace or assurance until this happens. All right? So I call this more of an experiential type conversion. All right? And he hears this idea of putting on Christ. Isn't that amazing? It's like, I have a garment for you. Put this on. He says, I closed the book, marking the place with a finger between the leaves or by some other means, and I told Alypius what had happened. My face was peaceful now. He in return told me what had been happening to him without my knowledge. He asked to see what I'd read. I showed him, and he looked further than my reading had taken me, and I did not know what followed. But the next verse says, make room for the person who is weak in faith. He referred this text to himself and interpreted it to me. Confirmed by this admonition, he associated himself with my decision and good purpose without any upheaval. I'll put on Christ too. I'll do this as well. For it was entirely in harmony with his own moral character, which for a long time now had been far, far better than mine. We went indoors and told my mother. This is so cool. She's just inside the house. This is the woman who's been praying for him since he was a little baby, probably since he was in the womb as her belly began to grow, and she's thinking about this little baby. What's he going to be? Will he love Jesus? They went indoors. His mother was overjoyed, and when we related to her how it happened, she was filled with triumphant delight and blessed you who have power to do more than we ask or understand. For she saw that you had granted her much more in my regard than she had been wont to beg of you in her wretched, tearful groaning. Many years earlier, you had shown her in a vision of me standing on the rule of faith, the gospel, and now indeed I stood there, no longer seeking a wife or entertaining any worldly hope, for you had converted me to yourself. In so doing, you had also converted her grief into a joy far more abundant than she had desired. Isn't that beautiful? I mean, just hearing of the conversion of this man and the joy of his mother. And I love to read that. I love to read the stories of conversions. They're just, they're quite stirring. And we'll see if we can get back into this and wrap up here. So this is his conversion. And then he has what I call an ecclesial chapter from 389 to 430. And he forms a monastic community there in Thagaste. He's ordained a presbyter and elder in Hippo in 391. He's appointed co-bishop in 395, and the next year his co-bishop or co-elder dies, and he is the sole bishop 396 all the way to 430. And during that time he wrote voluminously. Some of his writings, the Enchiridion, which is his book on the virtues, on faith and hope and love, on Christian teaching, or on Christian doctrine, sometimes it's called, on catechizing the uninstructed, on the good of marriage, and then a series of retractions, and I haven't mentioned here like his book on the Trinity. At the end of his life, he wrote a book called Retractions, which is basically, he's gone back through his writings and edited them. But rather than actually change the writings and republish them, he just wrote a book listing all the errors or things he changed his mind on, all right? And he did change his mind, especially in relation to sin, and it's our relation to Adam, and we'll talk about that more next week. There were like 3 phases of his kind of doctrinal development there. The Enchiridion on faith, hope, and love, he lays out the Apostles' Creed, the Lord's Prayer, the 10 Commandments, all right? The Apostles' Creed, faith, the Lord's Prayer, hope, laying out the promises of God, that we pray the promises of God, and love, love for God, love for man in the Ten Commandments, all right? Usually when we think of faith, hope, and love, it's things to believe, things God has given us to hope in, and then things to do. And what's interesting, this order of Apostles' Creed, Lord's Prayer, Ten Commandments, we find this throughout church history in various, like, catechisms. Luther's catechism, he talks about the creed, talks about the prayer, and talks about the commandments. It's right there in his smaller catechism that he makes. So this layout is very common to the Reformation period as well. On Christian teaching, Kenneth Stanglin here says that Augustine sets out to teach the fundamentals of biblical interpretation. So really his book on Christian teaching or on Christian doctrine is a book on hermeneutics. So it's not necessarily a systematic theology. What does the Bible teach? How do we interpret the Bible? And then how do we teach the Bible? We're not going to have time to discuss these. These are three of their books. I was thinking of these later. Confessions, the Trinity, the City of God. His Confessions in particular this is the first ever spiritual autobiography. It's not hard to find spiritual autobiographies of people today. I have in my study, I don't know, 1,000 books that are biographical. Probably 700 that are Christian biography and 300 that are more, worldly, secular, political type things, all right? It's not uncommon to find somebody writing about themselves today, all right? But in the 4th century, it was like unheard of. Nobody did that. But Augustine, all right, he writes his own confessions. Now, it's not all just like his personal testimony. It's what he confesses. It's what he affirms to be true regarding God, man, Christ, salvation, the gospel, the church, the Bible, hermeneutics, how to interpret the Bible, and also interspersed in there is his own life, his relationship with his mother, Monica, his conversion to Christ, the section that we just read a moment ago. Principal controversies, there's a Donatist controversy, the Pelagian controversy, and a semi-Pelagian controversy. And we're going to talk next week about the Pelagian controversy. And, all right, we're going to